Hi, good morning, everybody. Happy 4th of July weekend. Hopefully everybody's going out later, having a great barbecue. For those of you that don't really know me, a couple months ago I taught a class here on Friday nights. Those that did come, you know that I like to talk a lot about science, mathematics, philosophy. I get very technical. But to disappoint Tommy, today is not going to be so much of that. However, being that is who I sort of am, I'm going to start with some science. So, Sean, if you want to pull up that photograph for me, please. So, I want to point out something in this picture. This is just a picture of the night sky. If you'll notice, there's a highlighted, looks like a star in red. Now, what that actually is that is our nearest galactic neighbor. That is a galaxy. It's called the Andromeda Galaxy. Just so you know that galaxy alone, that little spot in the sky, has 1 trillion stars. For some perspective, if you were to count every star in that galaxy at 1 star a second, it would take you over 32,000 years. Scientists estimate that there's probably 1 trillion galaxies in our universe, each with 1 trillion stars. It's funny, that makes me think of the end of Genesis 1:16, where it just says, he created the stars also. Like, oh, hey guys, here's some stars, by the way. Now, I want to start my message by reading from Psalms 8, 3 through 4. Now, David writes, and sort of keep what I just talked about the universe in your mind. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you take thought of him? The Son of Man that you care for him? Now, so what I want to talk about today is sort of give a little bit of an answer to David's question that he's asking. But I want to approach it from a different perspective. Not so much what is man, but who is God? I think there is something in what David is asking, that there's a side of it that he isn't addressing, and it's who God is that makes him mindful of us. So I want to sort of just use 2 examples to go over this. I know I don't usually do lists. I know David loves his lists, so I decided to come up with a list of 2. Easy to keep track of. And so I'm going to use these 2 examples to reveal a little bit of what God's heart is like. And these 2 examples have to do with women and children. Now, men, don't feel relieved, like, oh, great, I don't have to pay attention. He's not talking to me. Because in reality, we are children in big bodies, all men. So you are part of the second category. So the first example, what I want to talk about is we can sort of start to see the heart of God in the way that Jesus treated women. He sort of stands unique in time, the time he was alive, in the way he treated women. Now, throughout human history, we have a very long track record go over the last 10,000 years of not being good to women. And it's not so much this belief system or this culture, it's not this religion. It's not like, oh, if you look at this group of people, they were good. It's human nature. Human nature has exploited women for thousands of years. In the Middle East right now, you can see it. And, it's shocking to us. But in reality, that's a lot of what our history is like. The time Jesus walked on the earth 2,000 years ago is very similar to the way it is over there now. Women at the time, 2,000 years ago, were second-class citizens. They didn't have rights. They weren't allowed to speak out in public. But Jesus treated them very differently. David, last week, if you're here, he talked from John 4:24. And the story David talked about Jesus approaches this Samaritan woman at a well. And he talks to her. And he gives us probably one of his many great messages to this woman. Now, the thing is, at the end of John 4, verse 27, I want to talk about. Verse 27, it's when he's done speaking to the woman. It says, at this point, his disciples came, and they were amazed that he had been speaking with a woman. Now, I like to picture that, and I think, why were they amazed? Now, the disciples, they were good Jewish men, you know. I sort of love the disciples because they sort of make me feel a little bit better about myself. Like, if those guys, God used those guys, like, he can probably use me. Probably, sometimes. But I imagine, like, they didn't say anything, but, you know, we've all been there. We've all sort of seen something, and we judge something, and we get this self-righteous look in our eyes. And I picture that's the disciples. They're walking up, and they're like, what is he doing? Why is he talking to her? It's not only that, this woman wasn't a Jew. She was considered clean, you know. You know, based on the law in the Middle East now and the law then, like, she's considered an adulterer. But God spoke to her. God gave the message about worship that David spoke last night. And there's many stories about this in the Bible. You can see David's even spoken before about the woman with the perfume. Jesus went to the Pharisee's house, and this woman came, and they mocked her. And Jesus let her clean his feet. There's the poor woman who gave basically like the tiniest amount of money, and it was all she had. And Jesus said, she's given more than all of you. The men at the time, the leaders, the Jewish men, were shocked by this. This was unheard of. Now, I know David doesn't like to get too depressing, but I want to talk about something that's kind of heavy. I don't want to like gloss it over. I don't want to sugarcoat it. So just bear with me. Try to bring it back up by the end. And this is going to be hard for me. In February of this year, and this happens a lot over there, but this one is very well documented. In Mosul, Iraq, 4 women were raped by ISIS soldiers. Because they were raped, they were then declared adulterers by the same men who raped them. These 4 women were then brought in front of a large crowd and accused of adultery, and they were stoned to death. Sorry. Now, stoning to death, and I imagine this is how it was done 2,000 years ago, it's not, someone doesn't come up to you and smash your head with a rock and you're dead. These are very small stones, smaller than baseballs, and this can go on for hours. They'll tie you, bind you, they'll throw stones at you until you're dead. Now, I want to compare that with Christ. I'm just going to read, this is John 8, starting in verse 3. I'm going to read the whole thing. The scribes and Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, and having set her in the center of the court, they said to him, Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery, in the very act. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What then do you say? They were saying this, testing him, so that they might have grounds for accusing him. But Jesus stooped down, and with his finger wrote on the ground. But when they persisted in asking him, he straightened up and said to them, He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they began to go out one by one, beginning with the older ones, and he was left alone, and the woman, where she was, in the center of the court. Straightening up, Jesus said to her, Woman, where are they? Did no one condemn you? She said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said, I do not condemn you either. Go from now on, sin no more. Now, I just wanted to read that. I don't think I have to add to that. Just compare and contrast what's going on in 2016 to what Jesus did 2,000 years ago. Jesus forgave this woman. Okay. Sorry about that. It's hard for me to keep it together when I talk about that. But you can see a little bit of God's heart in how he treated women and how he treated all those considered unworthy. Those are the people he reached out to. He didn't seek out like the Roman kings and emperors and be like, hey guys, listen, I'm the Messiah, let's hang out. You know? He went to the lowliest of the low. And, you know, I titled my message The Heart of God, and that's not something I could fully ever discuss. I don't know if anyone ever could. But these little instances of Christ dealing with these women give us a little glimpse into what his heart was like. And this is more of a personal examples I want to give, but I think also there's something in children. Something in children that sort of give us a little glimpse into God's heart and the way his heart is. You know, in all the Gospels, but I'll read from Matthew 18:3, Jesus says, "Truly I say to you, unless you are converted and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever then humbles himself as this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." What is it about children? I think that it's not really shown to us, but I think that Christ has probably had a very childlike quality to him. I'm not talking about like maturity or immaturity, but the sense of like wonder and innocence that children have. There's something in the heart of a child that is very revealing to what the heart of God is like. C.S. Lewis talked a lot about after he, converted to Christianity, which was very late in his life. He talked about how he had this new sense of wonder, like the world looked totally different to him. Like he never had seen the world before. He felt like his eyes were open. He felt like a child, a newborn child. G.K. Chesterton, and this is sort of paraphrasing, he said something like, we can get a glimpse of what God's love is like in the way a child takes joy in the monotonous. Now, what does that mean, like joy in the monotonous? So I'm going to use a couple examples here. Many of you know my niece Cecilia, who usually sits over here. She's great. A couple of years ago, I was playing with her, and I would take her and I would spin her around. Everybody's done it. I would get dizzy and I would stop, and she would be like, again, again, again. And I know every parent has the same story. Now, David last week when he was talking about worship talked about how God doesn't require us to worship. It's not required for us being saved, but it's pleasing to God. And I sort of imagine my niece, the joy in her heart. I think when we worship, God's there. Sing it again, sing it again, sing it again. Now, there's many things that are pleasing to God, and it's not like you don't have to be, in another country doing all this stuff. You can please God at every single day. In your job, do your job with integrity, do it with honesty. Don't complain. Try to be a good husband, try to be a good wife, try to be a good parent, try to be a good friend. Every day God will say, do it again, do it again, do it again. Not because he's the strict father, but because it makes him happy. Like my niece, it makes him happy. I also think his love is very similar to this. Throughout the Bible, throughout the New and the Old Testaments, we're told that God's love is everlasting. His love doesn't change. His love is steadfast. His love is eternal. And those sound like very nice platitudes, but when you sort of think about it, well, at least I do, because I think about these things, what is everlasting love? How is that even possible? What is an everlasting love? How does love not change? Even my love for my family and my friends, it's always there, but it evolves all the time, changes all the time. Some days I love them less. And again, a couple weeks ago, the same sort of thing started to become clear to me. If you were here, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago during worship, in between songs, they were sort of transitioning between songs, and Adam and Heather's son Jack was sitting right there. And what did he say? I love you, Daddy. I love you, Daddy. I love you, Daddy. I love you, Daddy. Over and over and over again. Now, I don't like talking about forgiveness or grace, and I don't think David has said he doesn't like to either. Because, I'm nothing special. I'm not a good guy sometimes. I get angry, I curse, I drink too much probably. And, I complain at work. I'm lazy. And it's hard. That gets in the way. I feel like God doesn't want to hang out with me today. But that's not God. That's me, and that's the enemy. God already paid the price. You've been forgiven. You've been given tomorrow. You've been forgiven every single day because we're human. We're going to fail every day. You know what God says every day to me? He says, I love you, Ben. I love you, Ben. I love you, Ben. 1 Corinthians 13:4, you've all heard it if you've been to a wedding. Everyone knows it. Love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, all the good ones. One that doesn't get a lot of play, sort of my favorite one, is that in that group of verses it says, love keeps no record of wrongs. God's not up there keeping a list every time you have a bad thought, every time you lie, every time you do anything. God does not hold a grudge. He just wants to hang out with you. You get in the way, and the enemy tries to keep you away from God. What I want to say today is that if you feel like something's holding you back, or you feel like, why would God want to hang out with me? You know, I'm just a painter. I'm just a painter. That's what I do. I paint houses. Why does God want to hang out with me? But because who He is. So every day He loves you. He loves you. He loves you. Every single day. And so, being July 4th, just know that, like, you're free. You're free of the things that are holding you down. And I told David to be short and sweet, so there it is. That's all I had to say.